Let's just jump straight into it here. So last time we talked about, just a quick recap, we came to the chapter 4. So as I said last time, all of these chapters are kind of like looking at traditional leadership theories, the kind of theories we went through in the first 3 sessions. And then they say, well, what are the assumptions that these leadership theories are based on? And they take that step back and say, maybe we should ask a little bit about those assumptions before we engage with the leadership theory. So you remember all of these chapters are basically what in the dialogue theory would be called bystands. They are taking that broader perspective and say, are there questions we should answer before we answer the questions in the leadership theory? And so the chapter 4 is all about this: what goes on in the relationship between leaders and followers. How do we think about that? There's something going on between leaders and followers. What is it? How can we think about it? And so they mention 3 traditional leadership theories. We could have we didn't do leader member exchange theory. Sometimes I do, but we didn't do it this time. But they mentioned some of these kind of theories who look at the kind of exchanges that goes on between leaders and followers. And in the last one, relational leadership, Ulbien suggests that maybe the unit of analysis shouldn't be the leaders and the followers, but should be the relationship between the two. Welcome to. And then that, of course, leaves us with the problem: what is that unit? It's easy to say, okay, if the unit of analysis is the leader, we just look at whoever is holding the leadership position, and we analyze them. Like, what do they do? What's their behavior? What's their traits? What's their how do they that kind of stuff. That's easy. It's the same in the same way. If the unit of analysis is the follower, piece of cake. We just look at the followers and say, what do they do? How do their behavior relate to the organizational performance, if it does or not? What can we say about that? So it's fairly easy. But what if the unit of analysis is the relationship? How do we grapple with that? Then we started looking at basically I will not go through all of this because we went through it last time, but Donna suggests that we look at Merleau-Ponty, and some of the things that Merleau-Ponty says, this thing about like the world is not what I think but what I live through, looking at their own body as a phenomenon among other phenomenal things. It's like kind of trying to go beyond this distinction between a perceiver and the perceived, to get to grip, because it's the same kind of relationship. If you have somebody who's perceiving something, there's the perceived object and the perceiver, and it's easy to analyze either. But what do we do with the relationship? And Merleau-Ponty is kind of trying to transcend that relationship. It's like there would be no perceiver if there wasn't something to perceive. It's like you when you perceive stuff, you understand as much about the thing you perceive as about yourself as about the thing you perceive. Last time we talked about these things. If I knock on or I touch the table, I can perceive that the table is hard, but and this is what I put my attention on, right? Oh, this is a hard table. The metal is even harder. But what is implied in that, or what is implicit in that perception, is that my fingertips are soft, right? So I learn something about myself in the same act as I learn something about the thing I perceive. And therefore, it just becomes one thing. And then this is like that when you perceive, that perception is a two-way street, is Merleau-Ponty's concept of reversibility, and flesh is the name that he gives to the unit of other self-perception. And so Donna suggests that what we can do, we can use this concept of flesh to try and analyze the relationship between followers and leaders. And then she has this very obscure sentence, I must say, I find it very obscure, where she says, maybe leadership is about strengthening the flesh between leaders and followers. And then how many think, what on earth does that even mean? Yeah, me too. It's like, what does it mean to strengthen it? I can kind of get to grips with the fact that if I perceive something, then I implicitly perceive something about myself in that act. And so the idea of an object and a perceiver is kind of shorthand for two parts of one unified process. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And if you want to call that unit flesh, okay, it's a perfectly good name for it. But what does it mean to strengthen that? That's kind of like, I'm happy I'm not the only one who finds that weird. So I was thinking about how can we try and get to grips both with the how this unity of perceiver and perceived translates into leadership context, and how can we think about what it means to strengthen the relationship or strengthen the flesh. And so I made this little table, and so here there's like at the top you see the three categories that we sort of think about. So three ways of talking about leaders and followers. We can either talk about the leader, we can talk about the relationship, or we can talk about the follower. And Merleau-Ponty says this is actually just one thing. So we have different, these three things are like different perspectives on one thing. And so I think a good way of getting to grips with what does it mean that, how do we translate this reversibility into the context of a leadership thing is like, I have filled in some fields in this table, but not a lot of others, right? I've only filled in a third of the fields. So in the first row, I've talked about the follower as obedient. Now, the moment you say that a follower or the followers are obedient, you are implicitly saying something about the leader as well, even though that's not might not be where your attention is, or that's not like the subject of the sentence, but something about the leader is implied. And what is that? Can you see what is immediately implied if you say that a follower is obedient? Yeah.
There's some sort of direction given by the leader which you can obey.
Exactly. You cannot be obedient unless there is some sort of direction given by the leader, right? So the leader is directive in some way. Now, I want to make a distinction. When you say followers are obedient, what does that imply about the leader? You're not talking about what should the leader do in order to have obedient followers, right? Now you're thinking in two categories. So some people might say that you have to threaten your employees to make them obedient. Some people might say you have to act with honesty and integrity to make them obedient, or something like that. But this is a causal relationship. I'm looking for the moment you say, like something much simpler, the moment you say that a follower is obedient, you are, the leader has to give some sort of direction. It's implied in the word obedient. So even if the word obedient is describing the follower, it implies something about the leader. What would you say that it implies about the relationship between the two? And it might be difficult to find words here. Yeah.
I would say it is somewhat one-sided because there is no challenge from the follower to the leader.
Yes, so it's a one-sided relationship, something like that. Yeah.
But also perhaps functional in the sense that it actually works when the leader effectuates whatever the leader wants to effectuate.
Yeah, but you can say when you say it's one-sided, you are describing something that's already implied in the word obedient about the relationship. When you say it's effective, you're giving sort of an evaluation of that. So that's adding a bit to it. Does it make sense how we are looking at a super basic level? How a word is implying something about the other part, the two other parts in this unity. Good. So take 5 minutes maybe, and just discuss at your individual tables what, like, if the follower is defiant, what does that, maybe we can say also, if the follower is defiant, what does that immediately imply about the leader? What has to be true about the leader in order for it to make sense to describe a follower as defiant? Yeah.
Again, you can add there must be some sort of direction that you have to define.
Exactly. You have to have something to defy, so there has to be some sort of order, otherwise you can't be defiant. Okay. So just go through these and see if you can see down by the leader, right? It's the reverse. If you describe the leader as dominant, childish, or inspiring, then what does that imply about both the relationship and the follower? And in the bottom three, you say something, you put a description on the relationship, and then you can say, well, what is embedded in that description about the leader and the follower? Does it make sense, the task? Cool, yeah. That's up to you to explore. And in what sense would you say it's the opposite? Because
for example, in the first one, you said obedient and directed, right? That those are like opposing words. But I'm thinking that this is negative. Like the leader doesn't have to be traditional. It can also be like nurturing or something.
Nurturing in order for the, yeah, but it's like the leader may be nurturing, but that's not implied in the word obedient.
No, I was thinking about innovative.
Oh, innovative. Yeah. It's like, but I will say the descriptor of the leader and the follower doesn't have to be opposites. In fact, in the first two, the descriptor that is implied of the leader is the same, and you can say obedient and defiant are opposites. So you can't have like kind of a third words that opposite two things that are already opposite each other. Cool. So give it a try. You get 5 minutes for discussing this.